Welcome back to UAP Studies Podcast. It is the end of September, and I think we're filming this on the 29th of September. And I want to welcome the guests and, of course, my co-hosts, Katie Page and Michael Glawson. I have missed you guys. It's been a week and a bit, I think, since I last saw your beautiful faces. So it's awesome to see you guys.
We've missed you, or I've missed you. I don't know if I think Katie said that she hadn't missed you
Katie's
earlier.
always busy. She doesn't have time to miss anybody, right? She's always out somewhere.
I always miss my favorite topic. I always miss seeing you guys. It's good to be here.
You know what's crazy too is like I'll be a week without us recording anything, and then you see like just Katie's activity on Facebook, like everywhere she's out on the field somewhere investigating, or is it some sort of festival? It's just how busy she is all the time.
Where
And
were
yet
you,
she's
Katie?
yeah,
Lies, all lies. I just appear that way, like so
it's
many
just
of
it's photoshopped,
the rest of the
just all
time.
photoshopped. Yeah,
It's all photoshopped. It's all fake.
yeah.
Uh,
But I love it. I mean, it means that, at least one of us is out in the field doing something. I'm always just sitting down in my house talking UAPs. That's about it. I have not hit the field. And I had MUFON reach out and send me two new cases, which surprised me because I haven't done anything with MUFON in 2.5 years. And I'm like, were these supposed to be assigned to me? I'm like, no, I
Is
guess you're
this in
not.
your area? Or are you just like you're the person in that area that they
I
have?
was at first. When I first joined MUFON, there was nobody really in BC doing it. Now I think there's up to 5 or 6 investigators. It has grown. People have discovered it as the UAP subject came up. So I don't feel as guilty for not doing it anymore. But at the time, I was the only one. So that's what I really want to check out the cases just in case they were really juicy. But I'm like, no, ethics, and everything is a good thing. Today, for the listeners, we have Mike Clelland. Clelland, I pronounced that correctly, not Cleveland, as you may have thought when you first saw the title of the episode. So he's joining us from just across the border from me, actually. He's just across Seattle, and I'm in Chilliwack, British Columbia, so we're very close to each other. We both live in the Pacific Northwest, and Mike is actually an author, and by the looks of it, and I'm just going to meet Mike actually for the first time today here with the co-host, but he's an experiencer as well, and he's written books about the synchronicities with owls, alien abductions, and he's followed up with a series of books of other people that have had similar experiences. So we're happy to have you on today, Mike, because this is a subject that we have not broached yet on UAP Studies Podcast. So thank you for joining us.
My honor. Thank you so much for having me here.
The first time that I really saw it in a movie was the movie Taken. I think it came out about 2009, 2008. It was a fake movie, supposedly
You're
based on
thinking
fake
of
events, right?
The Fourth Kind.
The Fourth Kind.
Taken was the Spielberg miniseries from around 2008 or so.
You are correct.
Yeah, it was probably a 7-8 episode series.
Kind.
A little bit
right.
X-File-y, kind of fit into that genre. But the Fourth Kind was proposed. When you would watch it, it was like based on actual fact, and it wasn't. And so, and there's a rich tradition of kind of low budget. That wasn't an A picture. It was sort of a low budget picture horror film,
like a C-list movie type thing, right?
Well, yeah. let's give it. I'll bump it right up to B, maybe. But it was totally made up. It was totally, except they obviously the script writers obviously had read the available literature. 2009, that would have been Bud Hopkins and David Jacobs and John Mack, and that sort of and within those books there's certainly plenty of references to owls in the contact experience in the form of a screen memory. So they certainly played that up in the movie and had the owl as a sort of spooky central feature where it was
and I think back at that time, Mike, I really hadn't seen much of that in Hollywood, or at least that was the first time I went, they've actually taken something from the actual, I wouldn't say playbook, but from ufology, from something that's actually been studied. So I knew the movie was BS afterwards, but I like the fact that they would like say, "Oh, I see owls at night" or something, because that showed like to the screen memory.
Isn't there a Whitley Strieber owl connection too? That's kind of like
I kind of took the deep dive and I did an exhaustive search for owls in the literature. Like, when did they show up in the literature? When did they show up in the movies? And so Whitley Strieber's book Communion was based on an event, like the actual within the first 30 pages of the book, he discusses and writes beautifully and very, very in a very, very heartfelt way, which he's wonderful at. He's very skilled at that. He wrote about what we would now call UFO abduction. He is very nuanced in the way he wrote that, where he never really says abduction, but he describes this event that took place. It would have been the night of Christmas night, so the night of the 25th of December, 1985. And then he spent the next year writing the book, and the book came out in early 1987. And the book was a huge success. But in that book, the initial event was triggered. So he had an abduction event that took place at night. And the next morning he said to his wife, I think there was an owl. I have a memory of an owl on the windowsill. And so him and his wife went to the windowsill. This is in upstate New York, and it's wintertime. And so there was snow on the windowsill and then snow on the roof eave below the windowsill. And there was no footprints. There was no evidence that a bird had stood on and there should have been footprints in the snow. And he wrote very poetically how it made his, I don't remember exactly how he said it. I quoted in one of my books, but it made his blood run cold. And I think that was on page 27. I've footnoted it many times. So that is the very first place in the literature, 1987. It's not that long ago. And where owls and UFO contact are co-joined. I have some spots in fiction. I got some fictional where it comes out, where it takes place in fiction. That's equally interesting that it welled up in fiction before it happened in like a nonfiction book. And then the television series Twin Peaks came out after. That came out in the early 90s, so that would have been 3 years after the book was published. And that had owls and UFOs co-joined. That's where we get the line, the owls are not what they seem. There's right in the very first episode, there's owls, watching the goings on in the little town from the trees. So there is now I have no way to prove this, but I feel strongly, I would love to talk to the scriptwriters of Twin Peaks. They're very tight-lipped about, their inspiration. But my very strong sense is that they were inspired by the extremely popular book. I don't know if I was around at that time. That book was everywhere. That was at every grocery store checkout. It was in every bookstore window. Everyone seemed to have it, and it showed up in garage sales a lot after that too. So that was my very strong impression that the Whitley Strieber's book came out first. Communion, yes, exactly. Sorry, I didn't even use the name. Communion was the book that was with the bold cover with the gray alien with the big eyes.
Bud Hopkins painting, the iconic.
Yeah,
alien.
It was a person who had worked with Bud Hopkins did the painting. Okay. I can't remember the guy's name. So, and Whitley was working with Bud Hopkins in that book. Bud Hopkins shows up as a character. He's a real life person in this nonfiction book, and then but I really have been trying to find earlier references. I have deer show up a lot because Bud Hopkins had published the book Missing Time before, and I think that was in 82. And so, but I think researchers were aware of the owl issue that takes place at the time of UFO contact, but it simply had not made it into the literature until Whitley Strieber.
Well, owls have made their way into our mythology of weirdness way before the UAP subject did. So it's interesting that they then reconverge once we get this concept of the UAP. So my idea, though, is that the UAP or UFOs is not a thing that just emerged. What happens is we got a new concept, and then we start recategorizing things around like the late 1940s as UAP, but it's probably a set of phenomena that have been going on in some form or another for a really, really long time. And if you look at it that way, the convergence of owls with strangeness goes way back to at least early Greek mythology. I mean, you have like Minerva, the owl of wisdom, and other sorts of birds, raptors are often associated with this. And there are interesting things about owls from the outset that seem like they kind of warrant it. Like the spectral owl is a pretty interesting creature that has lots of unusual behavior characteristics. Like they can't be what's the word when you go into the bush and you just start hitting the bushes to like flush it? They can't be flushed, you know?
Okay.
You can just walk into a big bush full of birds and beat it with a bat, and a spectral owl will just sit there and wait until you're about to hit it with the bat before it flies off, and then just watch you, which is why people end up having these bizarre encounters, because they'll walk through the woods and everything else flies away except this one enormous owl with this bizarre alien-like face disc. And then you just look over and it's like a foot away from you watching you. They're really psychologically interesting creatures already.
They're
So-
psychopaths. Psychopath owls. Yeah.
Well, they certainly have a presence. So what happens is I get letters all the time. So you could Google UFO owl. I'm the first thing that comes up, and
Nice.
about the next 25 things below that. And so if you can't remember my name or my website, you can just Google UFO owls, and I'll come right up. And so I've been at the receiving end of letters by the thousands over the last 15 years or so, and many thousands. And so oftentimes there's a kind of a normal baseline. I'm going to be very careful because I don't want to say that some of them are not that interesting, but someone will write me a letter and say, "Hey, I saw a beautiful owl. It landed on my back porch. It was so pretty." And you know what they'll say is it had a presence. It had a majesty. It had a presence, and it was eerie. And I think that's true. I think there's something about the owl. Their head movement is eerily still. So just on the physiology of the owl. So we have round eyeballs, right? So we can like look side by side. Our eyeballs can rotate in our eye sockets. Owls don't have round eyeballs. Their eyeballs are kind of cylindrically shaped, so they can't rotate them. That's why they have that eerie head motion. They almost have like a robot or something. It looks like and that is because they can't turn their eyes, and they can only stare straight out. So if they, like Katie, you just made a little owl. You did that, yeah. So I think everyone recognizes the strangeness of that and the majesty of that, and I think that ancient man saw that too, and from that emerged the highly charged mythology. Like some animals have a very light mythology. Rabbits and hummingbirds and dragonflies have a very playful, light mythology. Owls, like wolves, have a heavy mythology. Owls have a heavy mythology.
They're wise, right? I mean, owls.
That's the myth. They're not that they're as an animal. They're evolutionarily not as smart as, let's say, parrots or ravens. Hard to train an owl, for instance, but their defense mechanism is to stand very still. So they, like a gray owl standing against the bark of a tree, can be pretty well hidden. So if you confront them in the wild, they'll stay very still. And their other defense mechanism, this is almost like a predatory adaptation, is they are eerily silent in flight. So this is a parallel, like eerily silent in flight matches an owl, and it also matches a UFO report. Yeah.
In fact, the U.S. military, like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, have actually studied owl wings as a model for how to make stealth flight.
It's called the owl. That's called the owl. Or I think it's called the Great Horned Owl Project or something like that. It's literally called the Owl Project. Yeah. It's like it's the namesake of the project to do a silent or very silent, as close to silent in flight as they can. So there's a chapter in my first book, The Messengers, on the physiology of owls, and that was actually really fun to write. Like I wanted it to be I wanted to really inform the reader, but because the owls are fascinating not just in their mythos but in their physiology. So they can fly silent in flight, and that comes from a number of things. So you look at an owl; they have this puffy, big barrel shape. But if you see an owl with all their feathers plucked off, they look like this skinny little. Yes, they don't. If you pulled all the feathers off that stuffed owl, it would be this skinny, scrawny little thing. So they have this rich, fluffy plumage that absorbs the sound in flight.
Interesting.
And and their wings are specially adapted to be silent in flight, and then they have the eyes that can see at night. So they have highly adapted eyes that can see what we would call complete darkness. So the owl can fly in complete darkness in the forest with total comfort. And as they fly, the way they hunt is through their highly adapted ears. So they have excellent eyesight, amazing night vision. They have amazing hearing. It's my understanding that they have the best hearing of any vertebrate animal, the owl.
Oh,
So
really?
they are flying at night in silence, and they are listening for the sound of a mouse in the forest floor. In flight, they listen. And that is amazing to me. So
Or even in the snow, they can snatch them right out of the snow when they're covered, they're under the surface or whatever.
They can hear the mouse under the snow in flight. So when they're hunting, they just fly across the surface of the snow. In flight, they can hear the sound of a mouse like 3 or a foot under the snow coat. So, and then they're strong enough to dive and grab the mouse through the snow. Yeah.
Well, more impressive is my kids, when they were 2, they could hear a bag of chips open from 3 floors down and 2
The
doors
owl
removed,
coming.
Yeah, they're very similar hearing, I think. But what is the natural enemy of the owl? Just so I know.
I suspect that they don't really have a natural enemy in the sense that they're sort of the top of the food chain in their little thing. They do vie for territory with other owls.
Okay.
And their natural enemy, I would just given it is cars. They get hit by cars a lot. So but there's and I'm not sure in North America you're not allowed to hunt predator birds. So
Right.
The Pacific Northwest, there's currently being an exception made for the barred owl because it's encroaching on the territory of the northern spotted owl. So they're going to hunt like 500,000 of them or something. But I don't even see a reason why you would hunt.
I'm trying to figure out how that would work. Yeah.
I think
They get hawks, though. They train hawks to kill.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, they do that because then the hawks fly. They spot whatever they need to. I've seen them do that before for airports. They get hawks to fly around, kill the pigeons so they don't go through the motors. Pretty cool how they do it. It's vicious. I guess you use a raptor to kill a raptor, I guess. Maybe.
One more before we quit nerding on the physiology of the owl. I want to mention one of the things that I find so eerie about a lot of owls is this swivel head movement that they do because they can't move their eyes and their head. It seems like they're constantly trying to get a perfect lock on how far away you are exactly in space. So they'll do this thing where they move their head laterally, forward and backward, and up and down at the same time. It's like weird bobbing, swivelly thing. And they look at you and you're like, what is this thing? But it's hypnotic. Like if you looked over and there's a 3-foot owl doing this sort of thing at you, you're like, oh my God, what am I doing? And then you're in it. I mean, it's not going to snatch me, but I can imagine being a mouse thinking like, oh, that's neat. And then suddenly you're in the gullet of an owl.
Oh no.
Yeah. So they're using that to focus distance on you. I've had more than one abductee say they saw either a movie of an owl or an owl in real life doing that head bobbing thing. And they said it brought back a flash of memory of the gray aliens.
Well, yeah. And that's what I was going to get into, Mike, is that, you were talking about the deer also being mentioned. To me, the deer and horses, the way their eyes look is very similar to a gray. I don't know if you've ever just focused on the way that a horse's eye look, but that's very similar to the shape of the eye of the gray. And that to me, just every single time I see it, it's like, wow, that you don't see that in drawings, the bulbousness of the or the bulge of the eye, but you do in person.
And deer have that also, yeah.
Yeah, the deer have that too, a very slim face, big black eyes. So I could see how that triggers that in. And we talk often about, screen memories where people, John Yost, a director who we've recently lost, when he was a kid, it was Ultraman. He opened up the door to the bathroom and it was an Ultraman that was his height with the big black eyes.
Like the Japanese, costume
he woke up,
kids
went
show?
to the bathroom, and it was Ultraman, and then he was afraid of Ultraman, and then Ultraman grabbed him, and that's all he remembered. But that was a screen memory because when he was older and went under hypnosis, it was a gray that was standing in front of him, and the projection was that it was Ultraman because the kid liked Ultraman. So they seem to grab something from you or know something from you and give you that projection. Even Michael, when we were talking to Susan Alloway with the jackrabbits abductions, big black eyes, she saw 30 jackrabbits in the middle of the highway. And when the flash happened, it was 30 grays standing in the highway. So again, they grab something, and she was just thinking about jackrabbits not too long ago. So they trigger something in your mind. They already know something that you're going to associate. So what have you found that to be a common thing amongst people that have reached out to you, that these screen memories seems to be something that is personal to the abductee or the experiencer?
To a degree, many aspects of the UFO contact experience are highly personalized, and I recognize that. The owl. So this is so I went around and asked like researchers, like, why owls? Do you get many owls in your reports? I asked it of Bud Hopkins when he was alive. I asked it of Leo. I asked it of Barbara Lamb, and a lot of people. I reached out to as many people as I could when I was on fire with this when I was writing the book. But and they all sort of said the same thing. Said, well, the owls just sort of look like the gray alien, which is true to a degree. But then, does the deer have big eyes, but they don't really look like a gray alien. So why? But people are seeing deer. So at the top of the list is deer and owls, as far as screen memories. And this is really tough to get good data on this, but this is anecdotal from just me asking the people who are doing the more in-depth research than I am. And then below that, you get raccoons and squirrels and clowns and all kinds of other, cartoon characters but what feels more accurate to me is that the owl is an archetype, as is the deer is an archetype. So the owl is an archetype of like in many cultures it would be the archetype of so in the world's mythologies, owls. So to ancient man, owl flew through the forest at night. And that becomes a metaphor for traveling to these other realms. Like the night means something much different to us now that we have electric light bulbs. There's no big deal about the night. But to ancient man, the night must have had without a flashlight. Wow, the night means something totally different. So the night is a time of testing. The night is a time of fear. And the owl can travel comfortably in those realms, can travel comfortably in fear. And so the owl flies metaphorically in the lore to the land of the dead, to the land of the ancestors, to the land of the gods, to that other realm. And the next step is that it comes back with a message. So that's the archetypal essence of a lot of the world's owl mythology. Much of it is very dark. Owls are very often associated with death in a lot of mythologies, whether they bring death like as a harbinger, or if they arrive after death as like a messenger. And I have plenty of stories that match that lore, don't have anything to do with UFOs, but have to do with that death lore. Now, I feel like we have in us that collective knowing of the ancient archetype of the owl. I think we all have it imbued in us, a flicker of that knowledge. So when we see an owl in the forest, we are seeing a lineage that traces back all throughout human history, and we have an internal knowing, that collective consciousness aspect. So I think that is what the aliens are choosing. That's why they're choosing the owl, because it reflects that ancient mythology. If you ask Bud Hopkins, he would say it's simply because they look a little bit like the owls. Or the gray aliens. The gray aliens and owls look similar. And I don't have an answer, but to me, the idea that they would reflect an ancient lore is much more intriguing. Oh, yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, in your research and through the thousands of letters you've received, do you typically see that the owl coincides with the contact abduction, or do they show up before, during, after, all three? What is the common way that owls will appear? Is it like like if I see an owl, is it like a warning, like, uh-oh, maybe it's coming, or is it during or after, or all three? I'm just curious.
Well, it's all three.
Okay.
And but the overwhelming pattern is the owl will show up before a UFO sighting. Just so here's what's very common. Someone's walking through the woods, they look up in a tree, like, oh my God, look at that beautiful owl. The owl flies off, and then a craft flies above them, passes
Do
over
you
them.
think ET's using that as just like a calming, or I mean, do you get the sense that they're somehow communicating and working together, or is it just coincidence that they're showing up? Or
Wow, this is the question. This is totally the question. Like, because then you have another account where it shows up different. It feels totally different. You know, it shows up after. There's a there's a guy, John Martin. I put it on my website. He was videotaping. He's a classical guitarist in Georgia, and he was videotaping a UFO in his yard. Like, he's one of those people who seems to be able to capture these things on videotape. And the videotape is like 40 minutes long, and parts of it, the thing is making genuinely anomalous flight patterns in the sky, and then other times it looks like nothing more than a little satellite, and then it wiggles around a little bit. So it's not that interesting. It's a little dot. But at one point in the video, an owl flies through and passes directly over the UFO. So there's like there you have a UFO and an owl. It's absolutely co-joined in video footage. Like, the owl blots out for one frame, blots out the UFO. Now that for me was like gold. I've been waiting for that one for a long time. I got a lot of videos where people are shooting an owl, or excuse me, videotaping a little anomalous light in the sky, oftentimes genuinely making odd patterns in the sky, and there's an owl hooting in the woods. The videographer is oblivious to what I see as this connection. And so some of it could be random. You asked, do the UFO occupants like place the owl there? Does the owl somehow sense the UFO? Right? So owls have this heightened hearing. Could they just be curious? Could they be hearing an interdimensional doorway opening? I speculate about these things. It's hard to know. My strong sense is, and this is, so let me just, to explain this is going to take a little bit. I'm getting 5 things in my research that are showing up. One of them is UFOs and owls. People contact me with UFO. On my website, it says, I want to hear your owl stories. So the next would be owls and meditation. People meditate. They will often have owl experiences, which is very interesting. People who take psychedelics, most often mushrooms, will see owls, either real owls, where 2 people will say, hey, did you see that owl? Yeah, I saw it too. Or a total visionary owl, where it'll be like a 15-foot tall glowing white owl that'll speak to them. And then owls at the time of shamanic initiation. It's very well understood in the community of shamans. And then the last one would be owls and death. That would be, if I was going to write a book, I could write a book about owls and death.
Oh, really?
And it would be, I could write a big fat book about all the stories I've collected about owls and death. Now, so what that tells me is that owls aren't necessarily connected to the UFO, but at the center of this hub is what I am calling the highly charged human experience, of which all of those people have a powerful psychedelic experience on mushroom. It changes their life. Someone close to them dies and they get a message after their death. It changes their life. Someone is initiated into the role of a shaman, changes their life. Someone sees a UFO close up, it changes their life. So there's this highly charged human experience, a transformational experience. I feel that the owl is connected to that transformational experience more than it is connected to the UFO. The UFO is just a modality of a transformative event in someone's life. That's as good as I can give you as an answer to why owls.
It's almost like a frequency. All those 5 things have a frequency: meditation, death,
Absolutely.
and they're attracted to that frequency, whatever that may be. And even with UFOs, I mean, when people say, oh, everything fell quiet, like the wind stopped, the birds, the very insects stopped, everything stopped. And there's a certain vibrancy or frequency that people then feel. They mention it's palpable, like you could feel the energy. And I think, with your mention of the owls being there, it's almost like they're attracted to that specific energy. Maybe even we are to a certain degree. We just can't tap into it in this meat bags unless we take psychedelics or something else, right?
Or meditate or see a UFO or die. Yeah. So I mean, like
it's change of frequency. You change your frequency, you see things differently. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
So
go ahead.
Go on.
I was going to say that a very speculative thing that I'm coming to in my head on this is that so we don't have a great theory of consciousness yet, but
Hmm.
there are a lot of different proposals, and one of those proposals is that consciousness is sort of like a field that we're all, you know, denser portions of, in the way that like um, gravitation is a kind of like density of curvature in space time or whatever. We could be, you know, when you become a conscious being, what's happening is there's some sort of structuring and densifying of the field of consciousness that composes your mind. But that there's also a unity among all of it, right? And if that's the case, then what this interesting consequence is that while we feel like we're all disconnected individual observers observing the world, what's really the case is that we're all kind of networks together in the way that like a
Hmm.
CCTV camera system is. And if that is true, it seems possible that you could at least tap into that network and then see the world through the eyes of any of those individual things, just the way that you can tap into a CCTV network and like look through each individual camera. And if that's the case, and it seems like there is a strong evidential connection between UAP and consciousness, it might just be that whoever's running the UAP situation is kind of tapping into all the observers out there and using them as kind of eyes to observe the world. And if you were doing that, owls would be a really great camera
Perfect.
system to look through. You know, like so if you wanted to abduct people, you just turn on all the owl cameras and ears and sensors and look around at that and be like, oh, there's your person. And that would kind of explain the concurrence between
Interesting.
owls and abductions or owls and UAP experiences, because they're just passive observers that are being used and maybe even controlled in some sense. Maybe you can have some rudimentary control of the system if consciousness is that kind of field. But I don't know. That's pure speculation. But if that theory of consciousness
Yeah.
is right, it seems at least plausible.
I write about that in the book. It's the owl would be the absolute perfect animal. They can fly at night. They're totally silent. They have excellent vision. They could hear you, right? So the owl could sit in the tree and you could be in the building and it could look in the window, see you absolutely clearly and hear you with its highly attuned audio, receptors. So yeah, they'd be the perfect one. That's a very seductive line of speculation, and it I don't know whether that's true or not, but wow, does it fit? Like wow, you could make a really strong case for that anecdotally. I don't know if that's true or not.
Oh, sure.
As
I
I
mean,
don't know if any of us, this is like where what the truth is a wishy-washy thing that I have to be at peace at not knowing. Yeah.
that's hard to do. But and I'm not promoting this as like a theory that I actually ascribe to, but we have to speculate about
Oh
this
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
We
Yeah.
just all we're left with is a bunch of really mysterious data and anecdote, but you got to tie it together somehow. And
Right.
I think consciousness just has to have something to do with it. And if consciousness does, our consciousness has got to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think so. And
Uh,
I love the way, Mike, that you explain that, like bringing up the psychedelic mushroom experiences and the meditation and that. Because to me, the owl encounters and even the deer and that, I mean, I don't know about many of us have had those moments that seem very spiritual when we're connecting to nature in general, whether it's with a tree or a river, an animal. Um, and I think elk, like I think a deer and elk, I was just interviewed a witness who's an elk hunter who had an interesting encounter. And he actually said, he asked me, he said, have you ever seen an elk die? And he said their eyes were almost mechanical in nature, like a computer shutting down. And it kind of gave me this eerie feeling. But elk in general are very elusive. So you're not going to have a close encounter with an elk like you would a deer. But I kind of get that sense that there's something to that that's very spiritual in nature. And I'm curious, Mike, because you and I have Dr. Leo Sprinkle in common, and you've had your experiences, your personal encounters with the phenomena. And I'm curious, before you got into the owls and the UFOs, you wrote books about, packing light and being in the outdoors, and you spent a lot of time in the outdoors. Is this where you made the initial connection with the phenomenon and owls? How did that come about for you personally?
Well, I had an experience in 2006 with when I was with owls while camping. So I
Mhm.
did have it while camping. It was a very, so I could, this is, I've told this story many, many times, but I'll try to tell it quickly here. There's a woman named Kristen. We're very good friends. We're still friends now. This happened in 2006. I was 44. I'm 62 now. So that was a long time ago. And, but she was living in the valley I was living in, and I took her camping. I didn't even know her really. She was living in the valley that I was living in, which is right near Grand Teton National Park in Yellowstone. And I said, oh, you've been here all summer. You must have camped a lot. She said, I haven't camped at all. I said, I'll take you camping. So we went out camping and we saw 3 owls at sunset. And it happened simultaneously. The first owl showed up simultaneously when she was talking about her deepest beliefs about God. Like this was the event that set me off on this. So when I realized, oh my, she's talking about God. And then the owl appears. Like, I'm not at all churchy in that sense, but I do recognize the sort of mythic power of that word in our culture. So that the owl was absolutely, for me, tied into it. She's talking about God, an owl flies over our head, and for the next 3 hours, or let's say 2 hours, these owls are flying around us as the sun goes down. We slept under the stars, and the owls would fly right across our faces and just blot out the night sky for a half a second, absolutely silent. It was so magical. Now, it happened twice. We went camping 2 times within 4 days, both times 3 owls. The second time they were really close. And I didn't talk about it at the time. I wrote this as a diary entry, and I didn't talk about this at the time, but I wrote it in the diary, and I'm talking about it now. I got no problem talking about it now. It's hard to shut me up about it now. But I had a voice in my head that said, I'm looking at a real owl. I am totally convinced it's not a screen memory. Little 10-inch owls called short-eared owls. They're cute. They're like little sweet little owls, and they were landing at our feet. So there was no denying what we were seeing. And our voice in my head said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And at that point, I was reading a lot of UFO literature. I was well aware of the owl connection in the literature through books like Communion and some of the later books by Bud Hopkins. And I had events in my youth that certainly implied UFO contact. I had missing time, close-up UFO sightings, memories of gray beings in my yard. And so I was in a state of denial. Like, I was reading the literature. I knew what my experiences implied. I was not going there. So it was the owls so it wasn't like, so after seeing the owls, I started looking into my own UFO contact experiences. I reached out to Leo. That's when I reached to Leo, shortly after that camping event. I was in Idaho at the time. Leo was in Wyoming. And so that started me on this journey. So it was not like seeing gray aliens in my backyard that made me want to look into this. It was these owls that seemed to force me into it through that voice.
Any significance to the number 3, the 3 owls? Did you tie that together?
Well, it certainly shows up with the 3 beings, the 3 gray beings. So I saw 2 separate nights. I saw 3 owls. I'm convinced they're the same 3 owls. There's no way I can prove that. But I was in a different part of the mountains. But it just seems like. But yeah, I that's just my strong sense. So the number 3, it's really funny. I saw 5 beings in my yard when I was 30, and I was living in Maine. Woke up in the middle of the night, looked out the window. There's a bright light shining in the window, and there's 5 gray aliens walking towards me with this big, big, big bright light behind them. And I had this voice in my head that said, now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. And I'm telling this story kind of quickly now because it's a small part of a big story, but the eerie silence, that Oz factor, wow, was that palpable in my room. Like, something was distorted. I dismissed it as a dream because the sensation was dream-like, but it doesn't match any dream I've ever had. And I was completely in my room. Like, usually if I'm dreaming and I'm in my bedroom, the bedroom is somehow distorted. This was absolutely matched my bedroom and everything. So I woke up the next morning and I, out of total defense, like a forceful form of denial. I'm like, that never happened. And I'll tell you, I never went out to look and see if there were footprints in the snow. So, and I, in retrospect, that was on purpose. Like, I did not want to know if there were footprints in the snow. So these things were bubbling up in my life at the time I saw the owls with Kristens in the mountains of Wyoming.
It's fascinating because with a screen memory, they either are happening at the time that you are experiencing these things. For instance, you saw those 5 entities in your yard as a child. They could have imposed that, hey, it was 5 friends coming to your house, or it was 5 deer that were in your backyard. Like, you interpret it differently based on either post or pre whatever they decide to show you. In the event of, even the jackrabbits, or if somebody has a screen memory before an abduction, usually it's like it's imposed on them at the time. But sometimes people don't know what they see, so they replace it in their head. And that's almost as if it's placed in their minds after the fact, which I can't decide when do they do this process. Maybe it's selective, right?
Yeah, I got stories of someone in a car. So here's a story that the people are driving at night. This is the night that the husband, this is the night the husband proposed to the wife. So this highly charged night
makes it memorable.
Yeah. Oh, so they're driving alone on this lonely dirt road, and they turn a corner and there's this bright light, like a lamppost, lighting up something. And the wife says, "What are those kids doing dressed like ghosts?" And the husband says, "Those are owls." And then they talk about it later and they think about it, and there's no lamppost on that road. Right? So there's two different witnesses sitting side by side. The way they describe it is right next to the road. So it's not like it's something way off in the distance. It's like it seemed like there was a lamppost on the road. He saw owls. She saw what she felt was little kids dressed as ghosts. So you could just, and what were the implications strongly is, and I've talked to her, wow, she's had some powerful UFO sightings, lifetime of synchronicities. And so she's telling me the things that UFO experiencers report.
Right.
An uptick in synchronicities, and an uptick in mystical events, and psychic abilities and premonitions and things like that. So she has all the things on the checklist of UFO contact. She doesn't remember any UFO contact, but her and her husband have this odd experience on on a highly charged day of their lives.
It's the frequency. I think frequency has a huge thing to play. We talk about consciousness, but there are different levels of consciousness. And it sucks when I say this because I sound evil according to my wife, but not all of us are equally conscious. I know we're all equally created the same, meaning the same rights, but we're not equally the same consciousness level. And I mean that if you're driving right now down the street and you look at certain people, you realize they're not as consciously aware of the world as you are. They live in a different reality than you do because their consciousness is not elevated to where it should be, nor have they ever worked on it. And I have my doubts about this, their selection process of the abductees, but they tend, and Katie and I and Michael always talk about this, but the traits and characteristics from the abductees, or let's call them the chosen ones, are very specific. And, we were even talking about, it doesn't exclude mental illness. Like, you could be bipolar, suffer from depression, anxiety. That does not exclude you from their list. I've never heard of that. Now, psychopaths and sociopaths, they are excluded. I've never heard of them being abductees, or that aliens have ever had any, or non-humans at least, have never had any interest in them. But people like yourself. So I don't know anything really about you, Mike, but the people that are normally selected are artistic. They're able to be very empathetic towards others. They feel the other people's emotions. They're aware of everybody at all times. If there's one person in a room of 25 that's not feeling good, you spot them out, right?
Yeah.
You know who that person is not having a good time, and you'll target them out, make sure you talk to them at some point. Animals are keen to love you and approach you, and you love animals likewise. You love music. Everything is artistic and very free-flowing. You're a free thinker. These are the people that seem to be selected. And there is something you were talking about, looking at these characteristics. Have you found that to be any different than what we've looked into? Have you had anybody that you would question, saying, this isn't legit. Is everybody sort of in that field as well from who you've interviewed?
It's difficult to say 100% in anything, right?
Right.
But the word I use is seeker. That like is a good catchphrase. Like the
Right.
people who are having these. So, let me also back up a little bit. I am not looking at the overall population of UFO witnesses or experiencers or abductees or whatever term you want to use. I am looking at the very narrow band of the people who are having the owl experience co-joined with the UFO contact experience. That's the majority of the people. I would use the term seeker, which I really like. That's a pretty open term, right? So someone who's seeking, someone who's looking into spiritual things.
Okay.
I have a checklist. Here's what I ask. If someone has a powerful UFO experience or powerful owl experience or both co-joined, here's the questions I ask. What was going on in your life leading up to the event? What changed after the event? How would you rate your psychic skills? Do you have any healing abilities? That's all I ask. I used to ask more questions. One of the questions I used to ask is, are you a creative type? I don't bother asking that anymore because everyone said yes.
Right.
And it's kind of like, someone will say, oh, I play piano, or I dabble in poetry. And then, so I've been a professional illustrator all my life. I went to art school. I have written a novel. I'm like creativity is at the forefront of my very being.
Multi-talented. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so like my brother.
Think though that if, oh, go ahead, go.
Oh, I'm just thinking about I had this little conversation. My brother talked about sports all the time as a little kid, and I talked about art all the time. It's like a little kid, so it's never changed. Yeah, it's right in there. Yeah.
I tend to think though that on the theory that I hear this theory that like the people we know of as abductees or experiencers tend to kind of skew into a certain direction, but I also think that they're also the people who are more likely to tell you that they've experienced if they had, like, if I think if Joseph Goebbels had been abducted by aliens, we'd never known. Or like Ted Bundy would not have come out and been like, I know I'm an asshole, but I'm a counterexample to your theory,
I love that.
And those are all maybe on this theory, they're also the people who are more likely to suppress the memory, and not dig deep. Like we all have trauma, and the seeker experiencer type is almost by definition the people who want to dig down into their trauma and figure that shit out. And they're also people who are trying to do creative stuff because that's kind of the well of creativity. So it could be that if everybody in the world had this kind of traumatic experience, probably the only people that would come out and be talking about it and wrestling with it are the people who are trying to like dig down into that shit and like create something good out of it. The people who are like, I just want to be an accountant so I can buy jet skis and like go on cruises during the summer, are not the people who are like, and I'm also trying to dig down in my trauma and figure out who I am and what the wellspring of human consciousness or whatever is,
Well, that's like every good song is that struggle. Yeah. So every good, like a painting or a movie or a novel, like if it doesn't have that deep internal grit, it doesn't have the same value if it's just light fluff. I was just going to say something. This is so you get sort of pulled off on. Oh, anyway. So in my research, women outnumber men as far as reaching out to me. And I don't think that's because women are having more experiences. I think that women communicate differently. So it's exactly what you're saying. Like they're showing up in the data more because they're they're whether societally or genetically predisposed to reaching out and communicating in a different way.
More prone to self-report. I think rape is the same way. I mean, our conceptions of like maleness and femaleness are part of what suppresses or encourages our reaching out or expressing something like it. Like lots of guys have been sexually abused, and
One out of five.
And I think it's probably higher because guys don't even think of themselves in those terms, right? They don't even ask the question to know. Whereas women, because of our construction of maleness and femaleness in this particular historical moment, women are more prone to like examine their lives in certain lights than men are, Yeah. Can I tell you a Weird Al experience I had?
Please bring it on. Yeah. I live for this. This is my life. Yeah.
This was during grad school. Years and years and years prior to my interest in anything really creepy or weird. I didn't have any idea that there was evidence that genuinely strange things happen in the world that were that interesting. But I was at a coffee shop slash bar that I used to do all my writing at, and it stayed open pretty late. It's like midnight. And I would often just go there after teaching and write my dissertation until they closed and kicked me out. And one night I'm taking a break. I walked outside on the street, on the sort of sidewalk near the street in front of this place, and there were other like bars and stuff around, so people just kind of mill around and talk to each other. And I'm out there just taking a breath and stretching, and I strike up a conversation with somebody I've never met before. And you know that have you ever met somebody where like 2 minutes into the conversation, you're like, you and I are clicking really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna be friends. Um, we're doing that, and we're like laughing about how great this conversation. Like, how do I not know you? This is wonderful. Had maybe 10 of these experiences my whole life with a person, and right where we're talking, the sun has set. It's dark. We're probably standing 2 feet between each other, and a common barn owl, which has a diminutive name in it, but it's really beautiful and ghostly white face. It flies right between us, like right between our faces, and to the point that we have to go like, "Whoa, what the hell was that?" And it swoops up and it stands on a light, the top of a street lamp. The closest one to us is probably about 10 or 15 feet away, and it just looks at us. And we like look at that thing, and we look at each other, and we were just having a meta conversation about how great this conversation is going and how well we're hitting it off. And then the thing leaves, and I never saw the guy again. And we didn't. I I feel like I missed this great relationship that I could have had because we just never reconnected. He wasn't from my city or whatever, but it was a beautiful spark of a moment, and that's felt in that moment like a confirmation or something, because we all have that tendency to kind of spiritualize, even though I'm not a terribly like hallmark spiritual person, but that certainly felt synchronous and weird enough that it seemed significant.
So I like that. I just said Kristen was talking about God.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of stories where people talking about God and owls show up, or they're talking about UFOs and owls show up. My strong sense is this has happened since the dawn of man. I am certain two cavemen were talking about the mastodon hunt and how beautiful and spiritual it was, and an owl flew between them. I am certain it's been happening all throughout human history. And then also, like, the stories of owls and death have that same power. Like, wow, do I have some, like, I can get your hankies out if I start telling some stories, because they are so beautiful. And the stories that I'm getting are people, a parent will pass. This is the most consistent one. A parent dies, and the child is, well, an adult, is full adult, but will be going through the grieving process, and they'll see an owl, and they'll talk to the owl as if it is their dead parent, and the grieving is relieved in that moment, talking to an owl. This is absolutely consistent in my data pool. Oh, go on.
You mentioned, the title of your book, right? Messengers. What are the common messages that the owls have to share with us?
Okay, the simplest one is, so I would say pay attention, wake up, which are essentially the same thing.
Are you paying attention?
That's correct,
so pay
Katie.
attention,
That's
wake
correct.
up. So you did pay attention because you said it was a powerful event. You're talking about it years later. It's still, I could tell just in your voice and your expressions, it resonates strongly. So you did pay attention. If you were meant to have connected with that guy, you would have. So the power of that event is there. I talked to Christy Cardinal. Oop, I didn't. That's her full name. I talk to her, a few times a year. So it's not like we're close friends. She lives, across the country from me. But still, that was a powerful event for both of us.
So I'm almost wondering if, because I was talking to Katie, I mentioned something on your Facebook post this week as you're working on the ranch. And I was just saying how I'd like to go there. But my curiosity is more that if me and Katie are together, will we be able to have more odd things happen together based on our different experiences in the past? If we're both together, that energy is not together, would it be more concentrated? Would things happen at the ranch based on both of us being there. And I often think about even Skinwalker Ranch, depending on who you invite over. But there's got to be certain people that are not afraid to be on that ranch or any of the things that are on there, but they, whatever they may be, react to that entity being there, meaning the frequency of the being, the alertness, consciousness of the being. The lower consciousness you are, the more afraid you are of these things and the more power they have over you. It's almost like a spiritual aspect. And I'm not throwing that out either. Because the thing is, I'm a Christian. I am a believer in Christ, but I don't bring that into the UAP. I think they might be one and the same thing. I don't dismiss that. But I think it has something to do with our vibrancy, our frequency, who we are as people. The more self-centered we are, the more vulnerable we are because we're only focused on ourselves. And it seems to be predominant now that people that are having experiences that are above and beyond natural, that are supernatural, seem to be the people that are a little bit more level-headed or not focused on themselves as much. I think conceitedness and selfishness, that's a bad vibe to be in. And you don't see things. That's why people say, I have lived, 56 years. I've never seen anything. Well, yeah, but look at your attitude. Why would anything show itself to you? Who are you? You know what I mean? Like that is your worth has something to do with how these experiences take place. And I think the more humble you are, the more open you are, spiritually open-mindedness, understanding that everybody is in itself experiencing this realm the same as you, but we're not all created the same. I hate that when people say, well, we're all created the same. No, we're not. Consciously, some of us are way much more alert than others. The lights are way much on brighter behind somebody's eyes. When you talk to them, you can see it. The level, I would say, you can almost have a level 1 to 10, and you could almost tell which level that person falls into. But everybody that I spoke to, even a contact in the desert, it was amazing. When you shook hands with somebody, you felt their vibration. It's weird. I've never felt that before, but you could feel the energy. It's palpable. And why is that? It's because these people are open to talk to you about their life experiences. They're humble. There's a different vibrancy there. And I'm starting to pay attention to that a little bit more, realizing that maybe has something more to do with the phenomenon that we give it credit for. The other senses that we have that we as the Western world have dumbed down because we don't value them as much as we once did. But I think once we rediscover that, maybe we'll understand what this phenomenon, what the owls, what it's all related to. Go ahead, Michael.
That's a theory that or sort of perspective that I play around with a lot too, is this idea that like we're all like psychic or have some sort of ESP ability that we just haven't rigorously defined in the way that we've tried to define like sight, even though we think we have really rigorous definitions of our other senses, like the difference between sight and hearing, but synesthesia blows all of that out of the water. Like all sensation and perception is just this smeared kind of gradient that we draw little circles around and say, well, that's sight and that sound and that smell or whatever. But I think there are other kinds of sensation that we have that we just don't have a name for and haven't learned to attune ourselves to and develop those senses as rigorously as we might. And probably lots of animals have this too. So if it's the case that like all minds are sort of perceiving to some degree this unified field of conscious experience, it would make sense that there are animals that just their form of consciousness is much more attuned to that too. And it might be the case that when you're really clicking and like in that deep kind of meditative synchronized state with another person, that's the state that owls just like to be in too. And they sense that and they're like, oh, let's go over here and like see what's going on. It's like how they find each other or something. Or it could be evolutionary. Like owls could sense anxiety as a hunting tactic. If you can psychically perceive the anxiety of a creature, or if you can psychically perceive whatever state a creature's in when it's trying to hide from you or when it's perceived that you're there, that would be a really helpful hunting.
Or even smell. Like dogs could smell your emotions. Like imagine having the ability to smell that somebody's afraid of you or somebody's anxious around you. Like your whole perception of reality changes based on that. Now, our whole concept as humans, all four of us, is just based off the 5 senses that we have, which is very limited. We know we can't even see the bulk of the light spectrum. We can't hear the bulk of the audible spectrum. Like we're very limited. And yet we base absolutes on the very limited factors that we have. Even our science is based off the 5 senses that we have. We cannot observe anything past that. That's why AI might be able to help us think outside the box. But thinking outside the box with this phenomenon really is what's needed. And, even looking at the owls, like that's great that you've picked this niche within ufology, because everybody needs to pick a niche to focus on, to
Well, it
study,
picked me.
right?
It picked me. I didn't pick it. So,
Well, yeah, absolutely. And that's a great way to look at it. It picked you. And I think, it's the same with us. I mean, none of us would be doing this if we didn't feel that there was something behind it pushing us in the butt to do it. I guarantee you that there's days I'm lazy. I don't want to do this. I don't want to study ufology. I don't feel like doing a podcast, but you have to. And that's the drive that we have behind us. And why? Because there's something behind this. Go ahead, Katie.
I was going to ask Mike. I just recently watched a little documentary on, speaking of AI, Jason, that maybe AI can learn how to translate animal sounds. And someday, maybe in the future, we'll have the ability to speak with animals on some sort of, I mean, it gets deep.
yeah.
You go down that deep rabbit hole. Like, how would that even work? What do they think about? But the hoots of an owl. I mean, messages you talk about, are you paying attention and are you awake in that spiritual moment? It's very, like, seems to me like we hear of abductees and contactees having this spiritual awakening, right? And the owl plays a part in that. And I love too, but Michael says, look at two bikes, no, I think that maybe it is a frequency thing where it can sense like this connection you had with this person. It was curious, like this vibe, like a vibrationary thing. But I want to know from you, Mike, where do we take your research? Where are you going to take that? Because I love that you have this huge collection, this database, and do you have plans? Like you said, you have so much material, you could write a book on death experiences and owls. Where do you take it from here?
Okay. So here I got books on my desk here. So here's my books. I'm gonna stack them up. Here's my 3 owl books. So here they are.
You got to write one about people that come back from near-death experience, and it's titled "Owl Be Back."
Yeah.
You know what? This is like if I did the 5 modalities. I want the near-death. I read a lot about the near-death experience. I talk to people who have the near-death experience. They don't have owl experiences. They should. Doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it feel like it would fit? It doesn't. I got nobody. They might be out there. They simply haven't reached out to me. So, okay. So there's 3 books. These are my 3
we're
books.
looking at hidden experience. And
we can read them.
Yeah, and then stories from the messengers, and then the messengers. So these are the 3 books.
So they were published from bottom up. So this is almost exactly 1,000 pages. So 1,000. So I've written 1,000 pages. I was on fire the years I was writing these books. I wrote 1,000 pages on owls and UFOs.
Wow.
People say, "Hey, can you write another book?" And I'm like, if I can't say it in 1,000 pages, like it's not going to do anyone any good to me. Put more out there. It's like I feel like I made a really good argument in those 3 books that there's a connection. What I did do is I wrote a fiction book where, and I'm going to push this a little bit, or like try to do it, not push it, but let me. So what happened is,
are you here?
So what happened is, people tell me these stories, and within the story is a flavor and a mood, like that I can sense. Like I can tell, people say, "Have you ever heard this story before?" And I'm like, "Wow, well, I haven't heard that story exactly, but I've heard many with the same flavor and mood." So I kind of wrote a paranormal thriller that it's a little bit mythic in its storytelling, and it incorporates the flavor and mood of the stories I've been hearing and some of my own personal experiences. Here, this is not in the book, but let me just tell a story. This story just wants to well up. Everyone's talking, like, I should tell this one story. I have thousands of stories I could tell. And it's tough because some of them, it's hard to tell them quickly. This woman contacts me. She tells me the story. She's talking to her father on the phone, and she pulls into her driveway at night. And she thought there was a little kid in the driveway. And then it jumps up and flies into the tree, and she realizes it's an owl. So she gets off the phone, and she goes outside the car, and she looks at the owl, and she calls her son. So her son runs and says, "There's an owl. You got to come out and see this owl in the driveway." So it's in a tree, and the son comes out, and the owl flies from the tree, swoops down, and touches the top of her head. with its claws. And the little boy is like, Mom, are you okay? He was a teenager. It wasn't a little boy, but a teenager says, Mom, are you okay? And she said, oh, my word. I went, no, it was so gentle. It was so gentle. Now, later, this woman, this is all kind of crushed together. This is all happening simultaneously. So within the same time period, she goes on a hike, and she goes with what she calls her spiritual friend. And they go on a hike, and they go to the same hike every time. So this time they go on a hike, and they're coming back to the car, and it's nighttime. So the sun has gone down as they're hiking. They get back to the car at nighttime. They get to the parking lot. They look up, and this structured craft flies right over the parking lot. And she gets a picture of it. Now, honestly, she showed me the picture. It doesn't look like much. It's like some dots of light through the trees a little bit. But she said, oh, this was a structured craft. And then she said, oh, and everything in the parking lot turned red. The trees turned red. The asphalt of the parking lot turned red. All the cars turned red. The sky turned red. I'm like, wow. Like, I've heard that before in green. I have like one story in my files where everything turned green, but not. So that was like, okay, I'm paying attention. So during this time, she's at a little league baseball game. Her son is playing Little League baseball game, and she's in little stands, and it's the neighbor, and she's like, she kind of knows people but doesn't know them very well. And she turns to the lady next to her, and she's like, well, how's your life? What's going on? And the lady says, it's not good. It's not good. I need a kidney. I'm in serious health issues. I'll die if I don't get a kidney. And the lady says, I'll give you mine. And the other lady says, well, like, it doesn't work that way. We got to be compatible. You got to go to a doctor. There's tests you have to take. And she says, I'll take the tests. I'll take the tests. And so she takes a test. The doctor calls her back later and says, wait, is this your sister? And she goes, no, it's not my sister. I was like, well, because you are absolutely, I was actually going to say, is this your twin sister? You are so compatible. So she gives the woman her kidney, and they're both doing fine. She's saved a woman's life of this selfless act. So I asked the question, what was going on in your life leading up to the event? So she said, I was talking to my father when I pulled into the driveway. And I said, what were you talking to your father about? This is the start of this whole thing. And she said, I was talking to my father that said, I'm going to give my kidney away to this lady I don't even know. And then the owl, the UFO, this absolutely beautiful selfless act. Like, so the question I ask is, one of the questions asked, are you a healer? Do you have healing abilities? I don't have to ask this lady. I mean, like, I don't know if I would give my kidney to a stranger that I struck up a conversation with. But this is the power and the flavor and the mood of the stories that are appearing in my files. And that was what I was trying to do in the work of fiction, was to push this mythic, magical, I want to say bigness. Like, there's a grand quality to that little simple story about the woman who saw an owl in her driveway. There's a beauty and power to that, and that's what I tried to put in the book, this book of fiction.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, it is. It needs to be a movie. If they could capture that essence in a film, that would be.
Oh, I could tell you story after story. So I go on long hikes with people. So it's like, I say, okay, let's do story time. And then once you get me started, I can just go. Like, we're not going to run out of stories. Like, I'm not going to run out of stories
boring
of that power.
No,
Yeah, or you better, once I start going, I'm on
camping nights must be awesome by the fire. Just letting Mike go. You know what I mean? All right, Mike, give us some stories. And then the owl show
up. The campfire's coming on. Yeah. That's on the bucket list now. Camping trip somewhere.
Yeah. So, but the campfire story, I use that term a lot because a campfire story is different than a book. It's different than a novel. It's different than a children's book. A campfire story. So in essence, this woman's experience with the owl in the driveway and giving her kidney away has the flavor of a campfire story, right? It's kind of open-ended. Like, she's my Facebook friend now. Like, I see pictures of her kids and they're graduating from high school, and it's like, she's a real person.
Aristotelian beginning, middle, end, resolution, full arc, like character development.
None of the stories are. None of the stories are.
Yeah.
It's
UFOs are like that. Like, we pay attention to them as these structured craft in the sky, but if we widened out our angle of like the things that we considered and looked at how that experience fit in to the narrative of the person's life, we'd find a lot more significance than the fact that like something accelerated in a way that we don't currently have a propulsion technology to explain or something. Like these things are symbolic.
Then why does the witness of the UFO become psychic? Very common. It's right in the MUFON checklist. It's like right there is, like, have you had your psychic skills change? It's well understood. Nobody's talking about when they talk about the Tic Tacs in front of Congress. Nobody's talking about like, did you ask the pilot if he's psychic? Like, that's the question I want to know. Did the pilot see owls afterwards? That's what I want to know, or before.
You should talk to Matthew Roberts. He was on our podcast. He was the cryptologist on the Princeton or Theodore Roosevelt, I think.
It was on Princeton, yeah.
Yeah, during these encounters. And his experience went from, being
Obsessed,
totally mystified at what these craft could be to it's like deep spiritual Gnostic religion now, and experiences of like, synchronicity and ESP
But
sort of stuff.
he manifested them, though. He was so obsessed with them that they showed up in his room. And this again goes, okay, well, that, biblically prayer works, but that also means that our thoughts, our needs, our wants are also something that something else can pick up. And you mentioned about, the times where these things show up, or you ask them what was happening at your life. And it's very interesting that you do that, because usually people will have more experiences of abductions during their stressful periods of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they have good periods, and then they'll have one or two, but not as much. Chris Bledsoe was suicidal. He had Crohn's disease. He was thinking about killing himself, and they show up and saved his life. Why? Again, if these are entities that mean threat to us, why do they care about one person in the woods fishing that's thinking about killing himself? Why would they show up to save that one person and tell them not to do that? The idea of the threat narrative and all that, I think the threat is us. I don't think these things mean threats. They, from the side effects of what they do to people's lives, again, everybody's had a deep experience with them. I've become, and I'm not saying artistic, like, yeah, I like to like paint once a year on the weekend on a full moon. I'm talking about obsessive painting, like, your painting as well, Mike. It's just you have to draw, yet you're obsessed. You're going to write books. You accomplish it. You are dead set on finishing a volume of work, which most experiencers do, whether it's known or not known. And that's the difference. It's like, no, somebody could say they're artistic, but not to that level. We are not the same. The levels of some, I mean, we give ourselves titles, but there's different levels within those titles. You could say you're artistic, but what level artistic are you? Are you a number 1 or 2 that just dabbles a little bit? It's not the same thing as Michelangelo. He's a 10. So that's what I'm interested in, is the fact that these people are pushed to a 5 or higher on the scale after these experiences, which is either something is triggered inside them because of the experiences, or the experiences itself triggered them to become that. So it's very interesting that you're looking at, very interesting that you're an author, you're an artist, an amazing artist as well. And based on what you're doing, this is, you're just, I guess, adding to our volume of people that we talk to that seem to have all these traits and characteristics in common. And we have yet to interview somebody that's like, no, I do nothing. I have no hobbies. I just enjoy watching television, and I'm an abductee, right? We have never had that happen. Go ahead, Katie.
Well, I was gonna say, like Sean Cahill too. You hear, like the Princeton and all that have this spiritual awakening. And I think the work, Mike, that you're doing, I look at it not only, like you said, in the realm of UFO contactees, abductees, but as the spiritual kind of awakening and process and awareness. And I think that's an overriding theme of what I'm hearing through this interview here, is that these owls show up. And Jason, you're right. Like when things kind of amp up for me, it's during high stress times, or you hear that, kids going through puberty and you have this thing going on and things heighten, and there's a correlation to that. And I think it's so important, the work that you're doing in making this more of a looking at the bigger, broader picture, like Michael says. So I just think that's amazing. And I would recommend The Unseen, your novel. I think that's magical that you're taking all this and putting into this kind of storyline for people to enjoy. So I hope people, what is your website, Mike, and everything that people can go to?
You can find MikeClelland.com.
Like, well, that's easy. Okay.
That's it. And if you can't remember that, just Google UFOs, owls, and that'll come up right at the top of the list. So, and then from that website, I've got a podcast, I've got books, I've got a blog that I don't really do much with, but for about a decade, wow, I was like so dedicated to writing in the blog, and so that's there's a, and then there's some, I've got an art page and stuff like that too. So.
He's very humble. I checked out your website, and you're like, look, I don't want to have to promote my books, but I have to. And here's a section. Like, I love the fact that you're like that. You're like, look, I'm not big on this, but it shows that you have a good heart and your intentions are in the right place. And we need more people like you in this field. I think, people that are humble and just willing to say, hey, this is my point of view, but it's not the end all be all. It's just, and we need more people like that. We need to think in that way, humble ourselves to say, look, I just, I'll do my research, but no messiahs of disclosure and nobody thinking that they are at the top of their field. I think that's human ego that doesn't belong in ufology, unfortunately, but we're bringing it in anyways. Michael, do you have any final questions for our guest today?
The question that I always love to ask is, what is your favorite books on this subject that you would sort of press into the hands of our readers?
The trilogy, Jacques Vallée's trilogy, which Confirmation, Revelation, and Dimensions. That's cheating. I'm calling that one book.
We'll call that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And then John Mack's Passport to the Cosmos.
Oh, that's a great one.
I just listened to that on audio. It came out recently on audio. I read it when it came out. I footnoted it all over the place when I was so this is like, I read that book when it came out, 1999. And then I did the work on the messengers and footnoted that book all over the place. That was 9 years ago now. I just listened to it a few weeks ago on audio, and I realized I know so many of the people in the story. Like, I was like, oh my God, I know that person. We've talked. That person had an owl UFO experience. They contacted me. So the people in the story, he names them, and I'm like, I know all those. Not all of them, but it went from this thing, this lofty thing off in the distance, to this very intimate thing where I know the real people, or many of the people in the story. So that was really powerful for me, just to, that genesis over, over 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're authentic and, your intentions are good, you'll find those people will find you. They'll trust you and they'll find you because you are pure of intentions. You are good. You're there to help them. You're not there to like, hey, listen, I'm going to write a book and it's all going to be me. And there's so many people doing that already out there. You're not doing that. And I think because of that, the universe sort of throws you a bone and sends you the right people because your intentions are in the right place. And I think that's what we need, is especially in this subject. I mean, we talk about UFOs and all that, but the reality is people's lives are greatly impacted by this phenomenon, whether they're abductees or they work with a government agency that tells them their life are threatened if they ever leak anything. I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people in America alone, not even globally. So this is an important subject. And with all humble and humility as much as we can muster, we have to figure out what's going on. We're never going to get this answer from the governments. They're never going to give us, everything we want to know. This has to be a civilian run and globally run effort, I think. And like I said, people like yourselves and Katie, she's the one who reached out to you to have you on, and what an amazing guest. Mike, this has been awesome. We'll have you on again. I think this is a fascinating subject. I love the screen memory, screen images, and then now the owl factor, which might not even have anything to do with the screen memory. It just might be attracted to the energy these things put out, or who knows what. But what a fascinating find and great research, my man. That's totally awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. And we're getting close to Halloween, guys. I want to mention, if you are new to the channel, like and subscribe. And I just want to show you my new toy. I'm working on my Gandalf cosplay
I love it.
costume. So Glamdring came in. You know, I got her in this week, and I was just telling Mike and Katie here, Michael, that I ordered a whole Gandalf set. I had to order from different places. Even got the scarf from New Zealand. I went all out this year because it's my kids, probably their last trick-or-treating year. So I want to make it memorable, right? So I made a surprise for my son. He doesn't even know I'm going to be Gandalf this year. So I'm just going to step out of the house. You shut up, boss. And just, yeah, exactly. I was thinking about doing that right here at the, we have not an intersection, but we have a crosswalk. So on a Halloween, I just stand in the middle of the road and tell the cars they shall not pass. They probably would get a kick out of that. So, okay, guys, thank you so much for your time. Michael, thank you so
Mike.
much again.
Thanks so much.
And, we'll be back with another episode soon.
Are you paying attention?